welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and I am here with an author who I actually just had a lovely catch-up, let's meet each other session before we started recording. And she's lovely, and as you know, I'm a huge horror fan. A lot of us are here at the library, and we're very happy to have you. Welcome, Jennifer Gordon. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And let's talk horror and the Japanese box and pretty much anything you want to talk about. I'm all ears.
Oh no, what if I just start talking about my dog the entire time?
I would totally be fine with that. I am more than happy to talk about your dog.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love that. I feel like my career needs me to talk about my books a little bit sometimes. But I will just say my name is Jennifer Ann Gordon. I always stress the Ann, and it's Ann with an E, like Anne of Green Gables, because there is a lawyer who is brilliant and amazing. I'm assuming, I don't know them personally, named Jennifer Gordon, who has books out there. And I've had people message me like, oh, I didn't know you wrote horror too. And I was like, no, there's two Jennifer Gordons, because Jennifer is the most popular name ever for I think it was 8 years in the 70s and 80s as the number one girl's name.
And it was usurped by Jessica, or they were actually interchangeable?
They were interchangeable because I have a cousin who is the same age as me. She's a Jessica. And I was always so jealous that she got to be a Jessica and I had to be a Jennifer. And
I felt the opposite. I wanted to be a Jennifer back in those days. And yeah, I know.
I feel like this is like when all of our parents just bought that like best baby name book. And they were like, well, if it's good enough for everybody, it's good enough for our daughter. But hilariously, this is going to segue right into the Japanese box, but then we'll go back to like normal conversation. In the Japanese box, that short story that's like the linchpin of that collection, that started as a memoir piece, and then to fictionalize it, I wish people could see my air quotes, to fictionalize it. I mean, of course, I added ghosts and I added horror elements, so that's fiction, but I just basically changed my name to Jessica. And so many of the people that I know who read that book, they were like, did you call yourself Jessica in this because of Jessica Wakefield from Sweet Valley High, or because your cousin's name was Jessica? And I was like, it is both. Probably more Sweet Valley High.
Nice. Yeah. That was very funny to me, because I remember when those books were really popular and like Jessica, but I'm like, oh, but Jessica's the mean girl. I don't know.
I know, but she was misunderstood. Look, as a Sweet Valley High aficionado, I always knew I was an Elizabeth, Jessica's twin sister, but at the same time, Jessica was like the wild one, the one who like did school plays and theater, and I was a theater person.
Yeah, that's actually very true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's a good point.
But it's like, but I wasn't that version. Like I didn't have boyfriends or get invited to parties. So I was definitely not the Jessica.
But yeah, tell us a little bit about the Japanese box, because it's a bunch of short stories and there's a lot that's going on. And I think like one of the things we talked about a little bit before was just about how grief and horror and just sort of the way that we perceive the world, it's sometimes therapeutic to get it out in the most horrible way possible. Talk a little bit about all of that.
All of it, I know. Okay, no pressure. No, so the Japanese box, that original story, like I said, it was either in a memoir workshop or a grief writing workshop. I can't remember, but it was taught by the brilliant writer Diane Zinna. And I thought at the time, as I was writing this, at the time it was an essay about a conversation I had with my father one night when my mother wasn't home, where he kind of opened up to me about what it was like to be in the Korean War. So my father was much older than my mother. My mother was an old mom because it took them a long time to have me. So it was like this ghost Like my father never opened up about anything. And then all of a sudden, this one night, he probably had too many beers. He started talking a little bit about his time in Korea, a little bit about his time when he was on leave, he would go to Japan. He was a POW. He was kept in a cage for a very long time. And his family thought he was dead. His fiance at the time thought he was dead. He was found, I think it was like almost 3 years later. So like there was so much like horror in this conversation. And I was 10, I think, when this happened. And the story is called A Japanese Box because he said, well, I have something for you. I wanted to give it to you when you were older. And it was this beautiful hand-painted Japanese box that he got when he was on leave that he just bought. And he was like, I think it was going to be like, I'm giving that to my fiance. But then by the time he got home, didn't exist. He wasn't going to give it to his mom. So he just kept it. So he handed me this beautiful painted box and I opened it. And in it were some old letters and photos of women and photos of a baby that definitely wasn't me. That as a 10-year-old, I didn't know how to say, what is this? So yeah, the Japanese box, that story started as an essay about that night. And I quickly felt like it was something at the time I thought this is the best writing I've done. But I was so scared to like let it out there in the world. My father's no longer with us, but my mother is. She doesn't read my work. But I just like having it be out there so honest scared me more than any horror novel ever. So I took that exact essay and I just kind of tweaked it a little and I turned it into something different. And it ended up being one of those short stories that's way too long to be a short story. It's basically a novelette because it's 12,000 words of like, when it's that unpublishable length, too long for a short story, too short for a novella. But then like I met an incredible editor, Damon Manx, Last Wells Publishing, and we were just chatting and he asked to like read some of my work and I sent him that. And he loved it because it didn't quite fit anywhere. And then he was like, well, what else do you have? And I am the queen of my short stories are 12,000 words or they're 600 words.
I think though that's a wonderful format. Actually, one of my friends who's also a horror author, Rob Atone, the first,
Yes.
oh, you know Rob.
Yes.
He's awesome. He's great. One of the first books that I read from him, of his books was it was a novella and then it was a bunch of short stories. And, like you said that, there's the linchpin story and then there are the ones that kind of follow it. And I feel like that's kind of a really good way to read horror specifically and just kind of put things together. And, yeah, you have this story that's not quite long enough to be a novel, but you can add it's like a cake, like layers.
Oh my God, you had me at cake, girl. Yeah, so yeah, having like a 12,000 word long short story, novelette, whatever you want to call it, I paired it with, I have another also 12,000 word long short story in it called The Lithium Moon, it's a fun, lighthearted story about miscarrying and having mental illness. And what if all of these things happen on full moons and you get very much convinced that what is living inside of you is not living inside of you because it's a werewolf and you are a human person. So yeah, it's horror. It's obviously horror. It's a little body horror. But yeah, it's definitely about this collection specifically is about grief and trauma and just kind of do what you can to get through every day. If that involves murdering somebody, so be it.
It's just a book,
Fictionally.
It's fictional. It's
It's
fictional.
fictional. It's not a memoir, even though I'm always like, I talk about this book and people are like, but it started as a memoir? I'm like, one of the stories started as a memoir.
It's funny you say that just in general because I think it's people when they give you writing advice, it's like they say, "Oh, write what you know." And then sometimes you're like, "But I don't want to write what I know. I'm bored. This is boring. I'm boring." But when you put emotion into what you want to write, and you're writing what you know about various, just how certain things make you feel, and you put it in the form of a werewolf who, then you are writing what you know, but it's not, it's what feels real. So I always felt like that advice was kind of not the best advice. More so, what you mean by it is write something that you've felt, right? Put something that you've experienced, but it doesn't have to be exactly like that. It could be something else. And I think that that's what I love so much about horror in general, is that it is a lot of that. And you do feel a lot when you're reading it.
Yeah, and I mean that's for me, this is why I love the horror genre. I think it's honestly a very safe place to explore emotions that we're too afraid to explore. Like the best point is me trying to write a memoir and saying that is too scary. What if I add an invisible ghost twin that is haunting this girl's life and taking over? And that was a way for me to kind of explore things that did happen to me, but also definitely explore things that didn't happen to me. I don't have an invisible ghost twin who took over my spring break. I don't have that. I mean, I would have loved to blame an invisible twin for some of my mistakes, but I cannot. And I am not and never have been part werewolf, and I have never given birth to a werewolf.
Sorry.
I know.
Yes, there's still time.
Yeah, I mean,
So, yeah, so talk a little bit just about how you started writing. I mean, I've read a little bit about you. You have a podcast. You were a ballroom dancer at one point.
I am still a ballroom dancer.
We're still a ballroom dancer.
That is so when people always laugh because they're like, what is your day job? And my day job is professional ballroom dancer. I don't compete anymore, and I don't really perform that much, but I still coach and I teach. But I will say, as a ballroom dancer, people have an expectation of like smiley smiles all the time. And my very first book, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, came out very shortly before the lockdown, but like 2 weeks before. So all of my students were lovely. They bought my first book. And no matter how many times I told them I was writing a horror novel, I think they still thought I was joking because they bought it, they read it, they had like a little book club. And so many of them were like, what happened to you? What is wrong with you? Isn't your favorite dance the foxtrot? And if you know anything about ballroom dance, foxtrot's very happy, it's flirty, it's fun, sexy, it's cool. And then like I'm writing about somebody who had their chest carved open with like a broken china. They're like, it's hard for me to mesh the two together. This person who's like writing about the broken teacups cutting open the chest cavity. And my favorite dance is a foxtrot. But I feel like the horror is it's what allows us to go to those places in a very safe place. And also, like, I don't want to be snotty, but be like, it's metaphor, people, it's metaphor. It's my love language.
For sure. No, definitely. So yeah, so how did you get into not just writing horror, but writing in general? And talk a little bit about just sort of the evolution of your books, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you. I think like you probably hear this a lot when people say I was always a writer. The first thing I remember writing, and this is the loosest term I could use for this, was like in kindergarten, we had to write a recipe to be published in a recipe book. And I didn't come from a family of people who had recipes and did nice things. So I wrote about having a grilled cheese and baked beans. And it was like, open the can. The beans are yum. Like it was just that. It was like the recipe. But like I still like it's a core memory of getting that little spiral bound book that was like handed out to all the parents and opening it up and seeing my name and the recipe I wrote. So I feel like at age 5, I was a writer. I went to a Catholic school in 3rd grade. I remember we had to write a prayer, which I'm not going to go into it, but I have like issues with all of that right now. But I wrote a prayer for a cat by a cat, and it involved a lot of meows and repetition. And I wish I still had a copy of that because I feel like that's when I said, well, I can do this. I can do something weird. And I was always writing, I was always tinkering. I had a lot of some like bullying issues and issues growing up in junior high. And I ate lunch instead of in the cafeteria. I ate it in the classroom of my English teacher. And I didn't do any homework that year. I don't think like any at all. And she said, if you're going to sit in here and cry and eat lunch, you need to do something. And I started writing. She started giving me notebooks and I started filling them up. Poems, short stories. They were terrible. I was 12. But yeah, so I guess it started there. And then my very first novel, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, I thought I was going to write that as a stage play when I was in college. That didn't work because it just didn't work. Then I thought it was going to be a graphic novel when I was involved in the comic book industry. That didn't work. And then when I went to sit down to write it, I thought maybe it's a short story. I've never written a short story other than like 7th grade. And it turned into a novel and ended up winning a few awards. And yeah, it's my writing has since then gone to be more like more creative nonfiction, more autofic to like autobiography, fictional stuff. Um, yeah, like I'm writing a book right now about ballroom dance and murder and the slow slip from reality. So is that autobiography? Who knows?
I think it could be. Who
It could
knows?
be. Could
Who
be.
knows?
Again, there's in my current life, there are no murders happening.
Yeah, I mean, good, but
Hmm.
write about it. Put a little bit into it and it's metaphor, right?
It's metaphor. We all want to talk about murder right now, even though we can't.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I also want to know about your podcast. It has such an amazing title.
So yeah, so I host a podcast. I have an amazing co-host. Again, we both had books that came out like right when the pandemic started. And I'd been like kind of doing some online interviews and somebody heard it and they were like, you're funny, you're fun, or whatever. And I was like, am I? Like I just was like, I loved the compliment so much. I'm like, oh my gosh, should people hear my voice all the time? I mean, the answer is obviously no, but I didn't want to hear that no. So I said, I'm going to start a podcast. We're calling we went through a ton of titles, but they were all copywritten. So our title is called Vox Vomitus, which is fake Latin for word vomit. It really means like voice and then not really vomit, but like someplace that nobody needs a Latin lesson right now. So Vox Vomitus, and the whole thing about this was my co-host, A.M. Hubbard, Allison Martine. Allison Hubbard, she writes under multiple names, so I feel like I have to say all of them. We wanted to talk to the people who were doing it, who were writing very successfully, who were killing it every day, and ask them what went wrong. Like what went wrong on the way, what went wrong per book, because there's always something that went wrong. That's how we write. Like so we ask the questions about the bad rough draft. Our favorite guests are people who are like, I wrote this book 3 times And the fourth time it was completely different, but I couldn't have done it had I not written it wrong 3 times. We also love to hear, and we talked about this a little bit before we started, like our very good friend Josh Mallerman, he can write really fast. Um, and when and it works, it usually works. And sometimes like I love to time write myself, but I always call this my word vomit. And that's in a good way. Like I don't mean it to be bad. I think sometimes when we're not stifling ourselves, the best things come out.
I think that that is amazing. And I think like you talk a little bit, or you talked a little bit earlier just in the interview about how you were worried about putting your stuff out there. And I think that what you were just describing is almost a remedy for that. And also just listening to all of these people who are writers accomplished, at different parts of their career, just sort of discussing that puts the importance of word vomiting out there.
Word vomiting. I
Word
know. I know.
vomiting.
Nobody likes the word vomit. I get it. I've had guests say they don't want to be on my show because it has the word vomit in the title. And I'm like, I mean, trust me, we're not going to say it if you don't want to hear it. But no, I think every writer, every creator, we go to a place and stuff happens. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But the thing I like to ask people, whether we're recording or not, because sometimes this doesn't make it onto our show because it's our pre or post show chat, is did you have a book of your heart, a writing piece of your heart that you wrote, that you did, that either didn't make it out into the world or you're still holding on to it? And the stories I've heard from the people that I think that are the best in their craft, of all of them saying, I still have this book of my heart, or I wrote this book of my heart and 4 people read it. And everybody hated it, but it was the book of my heart. But I think it's all important. Like we have to be writing like that. This is why sometimes like writing shorter pieces, essays, 12,000 word short stories, those can be the books of your heart. It might not be easy to like it might not be like commercially easy.
I think like also you just kind of hit on something. People who might feel clogged about writing, maybe it's because you have a book of your heart blockage.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Girl, no, 1,000,000%. If you have a book of your heart blockage, sometimes even just taking the word book out of it makes it easier to like reach in and pull something out. I've had this, like, I feel like since I was in 7th grade, a book of my heart, this like ridiculous thing. And then every once in a while, like I'll mine from that idea to do an essay. And what helps me when I'm completely blocked is timed writing prompts. Like you have 9 minutes. When this 9 minutes is done, you're done. And then you stop, you put it away, and then you look at it later. And I will say, honestly, most of my best writing is coming from these little chunks. You have 17 minutes. You have 22 minutes. Do it.
Do you do this now? Do you do this in a group? And like, do you have like a
Sometimes.
writer's like Discord or something, for instance? And like my other question is there a specific time of day that you personally find yourself most creative? Or is it just like at the most inconvenient time when you're like in the middle of something and you're like, do, horrifying thought must pull over.
Must do this right now. Middle of a foxtrot lesson. You're just like in the corner. Yes, the writing prompts, sometimes I do in a group. Sometimes I do it on my own. I'm always, I love doing it in a group because I don't know, there's just like something there, the shared energy. Time of day that I'm most creative. I wish I could harness that. I wish I knew if I was a morning pages or a late night pages. I don't know, but what I do know is if I start a project and it goes well the first time between 10 a.m. and noon, then that project is written between 10 a.m. and noon because I'm a little superstitious. If accidentally something happened after midnight, I hate that. I like to go to bed early. By early, I mean 1 a.m. I have a weird schedule. But once I've been trying to make myself be a morning pages person for 30 years. It has only worked, I think, twice, but I try. Every few months, I'm like February, I'm in an early morning writing class. I do it every day.
I think it's always just interesting because everybody has their own, everybody has their way about it. But I do think,
Like so much
yeah,
superstition too.
you don't, well, I mean, like when you talk about like, like midnight, before midnight, after midnight, like, it's got that's like a very Gremlins-esque way to look at it.
I know. And like, don't we all want to be Gizmo?
So much, except for like, like,
They can't see me do my hair in front of the screen right now.
yeah.
Damn it. I was gonna do like Gizmo ears with my curls.
So we will vouch for you that you did. But yeah, no, I mean it's true. But yeah, I mean like again, like getting back to the Japanese box in general, there's so much there. There's like you were talking about like the werewolf miscarriage story and the semi memoir, but also stories of like college horror, which
I
I
know.
love
I
because to me like that was always the thing. Like I mean I think we are of probably of similar
I assume
ages.
we're close
We're
enough. I think
Yeah,
within like a 10-year, just because your name is Jessica and my name is Jennifer, and I
sure.
feel like
And we
so
and we know the Wakefields
we
and
know that we know the twins. Oh yeah, gosh.
there's always, I mean, my parents were always like of the like, yeah, you go to college and blah blah blah, you meet somebody. But like I always was like, I don't know. Like there's a lot of people I don't trust, like
Nor should you.
nor
Um,
should you.
Nor should you. I have never had, like, I didn't have a traditional college experience. I went to like a remote learning. I went to UNH and University of New Hampshire in a different city than where the campus was. Then I went to a fine arts college that didn't have dorms. I lived in an apartment. But like I've always been like, but I'm not gonna lie, I partied a lot at some colleges. So I think I got the vibe. So my story, Simulacrum in the Japanese box. I mean, it's honestly one of my favorite things I've ever written because anyone who knows me, they know that like my entire gig is like emotions and trauma and it's poetry and all of that's fine, but Simulacrum is like to me, like my love letter. And I know it's a writer that not a lot of people love, Bret Easton Ellis, also Chuck Palahniuk. Like it was like I don't know, it was like my version of going into that world. There's not a lot of likable characters in there, but I have heard so many good things about this story. They're like, more of this.
Too
And people
relatable.
so relatable.
Too relatable. That's all
Too
I'm saying.
relatable. There is so much lemon vodka and getting ready for doing stuff and having your period at the wrong time and just like the word like people would say they ask me like what is Simulacrum about? I always just say it's an origin story of a serial killer. I won't tell you which character it is because it could be anyone. Um and it's also like the worst college relationship you've ever had, times a billion. But like you know, I love that story. I crack up still now when I read it and I'm like, I should have gone further. And someone's like, really further then? And then they'll say something and I'm like, No, I can see with the way you're saying it, I shouldn't have gone further.
And I'm not saying you should, no.
Like penises drawn on coloring books near like little children's faces.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't go further than that.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do
It's satire, people. It's satire.
I do really just enjoy just discussing all of this with you. I could probably talk to you all day.
I feel like Jessica, you and I could be best friends.
We could be. We could
A
be.
Jessica and a Jennifer. That's like two halves of the same
It's like
name.
1994 all over again.
Oh my
Let's do
God.
clamshell
Let's trade
bang.
Lisa Frank stickers.
Oh yes. Woo!
Oh,
Yeah, we're
woo.
making clamshell bangs with our hands. And if you don't know what that is, look it up.
Oh, I know. I was like, oh yeah, they can't see us.
Yeah.
I think this is what I love about video podcasts that aren't actually video podcasts. It's like that you and I are both like,
Yeah, right.
let's go to the mall, girl. And people are like, what is happening? This is for a library.
That is pretty much all my life on this podcast.
I love that for you.
This has been great. Are you working on anything at the moment?
So I am. I've been working a lot in the past couple years on a lot of like short creative nonfiction pieces that blend horror and memoir together. And I've been having some luck in like the literary mag scene. I have 2 books out on submission now. One is a momfluencer dark comedy. I cannot say the name of it, but I like crossing my fingers. And then I have another book out on sub, and I'm currently working on a ballroom dance asexual murder book. I mean, it's called You Should Smile More.
I would love to talk to you about both of these.
I feel like we're going to get off of this call and I'm going to be like, I'm sending these to you right now.
That would be so great.
I have to get permission from people before.
Fair. All right. Well, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries podcast. My guest today was Jennifer Ann with an E. Gordon.
Like Anakin Gables.
Check out The Japanese Box. Check out Vox Vomitus. She's amazing. I can tell you right now, we're going to be chatting a lot in the future. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.